Joining us for our Emmys Costume Designers panel is Christine Bieselin Clark from Star Trek Picard. Christine, thanks for joining us. Were you a Trekkie before
Thank
you
you.
joined?
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Were you a Trekkie before you joined Picard?
I would say that I was a peripheral Trekkie, and some of them prefer Trekkers, which I've found out now. I was familiar with the franchise from a distance and definitely familiar with earlier iterations like the original series, watching with my dad, TNG. But I wasn't a hardcore fan. So the beginning of the process for me was a lot of education.
So how did you come aboard the show, and what were like the early discussions like? Because it's like, 20 years later and Patrick Stewart's coming back. So it's kind of like a big undertaking.
No pressure. Yeah, I mean, I think I came to the project in a lot of ways that we all do, which is in a search. The producers were seeking someone with a background in science fiction, but not exclusively in science fiction, because our take on this was pretty different. I mean, a lot of the science fiction that you see is very sleek and has a very sci-fi futuristic kind of coldness to it. So they really wanted a costume designer who had experience outside of science fiction as well as inside of it to kind of meld those worlds, because this is a pretty different take on Star Trek. It's a much more humanized, grounded, for lack of a better word, interpretation into the franchise.
Yeah, definitely. Because when the show opens, like Picard is in his like retirement vineyard, and it's a lot of like the clothes are very like naturalistic and like minimal, and a lot of sweaters and reds and greens. So can you talk about your inspirations for those Earthbound outfits?
Yeah, it was very intentional. The directives in meeting with our producers and Patrick, not only playing the title character, but also an executive producer on the project as well, was to create a really different look at Picard. So much time has gone by, he's retired, incredible events have happened since he has left Starfleet, and he's living a really different life than the one that we've seen him on a bridge crew, which is where Star Trek mostly takes place. So coming to a chateau and being in France and being on Earth were completely different experiences, and we wanted to bring a lot of color and texture and warmth to that to tell a very different story of the character than had been told before.
Is there any, like, I guess, synthetic material in those outfits there?
Yeah, it's interesting because when you start on a project that is future forward, you're always trying to create a point of view. What are your parameters in the world building? Because you're creating something that isn't grounded in history. It isn't known to us. So what are our projections of that world of the future and how far we're going into the future? And I think oftentimes synthetics become the old reliable in that, and that's where you get that like kind of feeling. And because Picard is a lover of history and an archivist and a reader of paper books, even in 2400, we really wanted to keep a hold of a lot of the natural materials, especially in our Earthbound portion of it in the beginning of the series. So we eventually get into lots of synthetics, but we transition. We kind of slowly get there.
Yeah. Before he goes into space.
Yes.
So what kind of materials did you use for most of his like sweaters and turtlenecks? Were they all from scratch, or did you source anything?
We made almost everything that Patrick wears in the series. In the beginning, yes, we're very much grounded in natural materials of cottons and wools and linens, and doing blends of those, because the ability to create depth of color and get interest and textures and mixtures of those things without that glossy feeling, those materials were definitely the best for us. And they have an old world feeling. So when you create an asymmetrical line or an interesting texture that's future forward, and then you meld it into a very familiar historical traditional materiality, that's a unique language, and that's what we're really going for.
I did love like how I think it was like his sweater or cape or something. It was like the asymmetrical line, so it was like still like Star Trek-y. So how conscious were you of like putting like elements of that in like each costume for all the characters?
Yeah. It's as much as you're trying to gradually bring the character from the last time we saw him into where we are now, we're taking our fans on that ride as well. So you do pull from that burgundy Bordeaux kind of red tone that we've seen him as a captain, and create that asymmetrical sweater that's texturized. And yeah, we did a lot of archival research into the entire catalog of fashion for Jean-Luc Picard, and used that as our sort of jumping off point for the story that we were telling now.
In the 4th episode, like there's a flashback to when he first goes to Vashti, and he's wearing this like really nice like white linen outfit, and it looks like he's just like on vacation somewhere, and it's very hopeful. And then like later when he goes there in the present, he's wearing like black and dark, which is
well,
like,
look, it worked. Storytelling and costume design working. Yeah, we did want, in that same episode, you're going into a flashback for him, and then a forward tense, and in between those two things, some very dramatic events have happened, and there's a very distinct point of view for the character in those really different moments. So as much of a difference as we could create in the hopefulness and the warmth and joy of the entry into that episode, that would give us a better jumping off point for where we were going and when things get a lot darker.
So can you talk a little bit more about like your approach to the space outfits when they actually go? Because like it's not the typical futuristic like you were talking about before, like the sleek like shiny material, like super synthetic, but it's still dark, like a lot of neutral colors, very like utilitarian. Yeah. So what was your approach to that?
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, we're going onto a spaceship in Star Trek where there isn't a uniform. And that was kind of a whole new place to go with it. So it's not a crew. It's a hastily assembled group of people for a very unique moment that's happening really quickly. So when we first took them on that ship, we were taking who they were. Rios is there already. He inhabits the ship. He's of the space. So his color palette was very distinctly connected to it. But everyone else, like Alison Pill's character, Dr. Girardi, arrives on that ship in like, she looks the most significantly out of place, but that was extremely intentional. She's wearing kind of this light blue, bright cornflower trench coat, and you're like, what is this woman doing on a starship? But over time, we did see them transition into becoming a crew and becoming of the space. And because there isn't a uniform, there are replicators. You do make choices when you're replicating. So there are distinct things that you would choose for yourself based on your personality, but they are of the ship, the La Sirena. So there is a very deep, dark palette that we used kind of for everybody over the course of it. And then there's also unique things that we did, which was extrapolating geometry from the production design of the ship and using that in the clothing. So for instance, that same episode of Picard, when he goes on Vashti wearing the black jacket, all of that relief that we did with our specialty costume team is all based on the geometry of the designs in the production design of the ship.
Wow. I love what you put 7 of 9 in, because she also has sweaters and they look so cozy. I was like, I want one. And I think everyone remembers the catsuit. So what kind of discussions did you have with Jerry about updating her look for this?
Jerry, by the way, is just one of the best people in the world to work with. I was terrified of going into that room with Hollywood royalty and Star Trek royalty, and she's just the warmest, most lovely, wonderful person to collaborate with. But I think we both very, very, very much wanted to get away from the sleek hourglass sexy catsuit of Next Generation of Voyager. It just didn't suit the story, and we wanted to show time passing for that character as well. So as much as we have reverence for that hourglass silhouette and coming into the body, we're doing it in a very different way. And the way to do that now is to show her power and strength physically for the task that and the journey that she's on now. But again, using texture and knitwear to create a connection. We didn't want to feel so distant from these characters that they were so far in the future that we couldn't be emotionally connected to them on the journey that they were on.
There's also more mobility in like a mesh sweater.
Yes, I mean, if you're going to be
kicking ass, yeah,
she's kicking ass all the time. So she had to be able to, do a little roundhouse.
Yeah. Well, the show has been renewed for a 2nd season. So have you started any early boards yet? Any ideas for season 2?
We have. We actually went back in the beginning, end of February, beginning of March, and then continued to work remotely on working on designs and concepts. We've been on a little bit of a pause, but we hope to go back soon. So yes, initial concepts and scripts and story are already happening, and lots of really interesting things are afoot.
More sweaters. I just love the sweaters, that's all.
I love using knitwear in the future just because it's, you know, you can shapeshift it any way that you want and adapt it to what you need, but on camera it just reads so beautifully and it's so unique and interesting to science fiction.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Christine, well, it was great speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you back here in a little bit.
Okay, thanks.